Let's pray. Holy God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So Joseph in this story is in what seems to be an impossible situation. It seems like he has no good choices, and in fact, he doesn't. He's being harassed, he's being pressured we could say in the workplace, although he's a slave, so it's not exactly the same as what we would experience today, not exactly the same dynamics, but in a situation where he has very little power and somebody else has more, he's being harassed and he's being coerced to do something he doesn't want to do. And he has to either give in to that, or what he ends up doing is arguing for a little while and then finally running away and ending up in jail. So he's got no really good choices. I do wish this story, I wish there was some difference, because the way it reads in our modern context is a little hard, in that we are in a time when it's becoming more clear and we are realizing how important it is to believe the stories of victims of harassment. It doesn't mean we don't investigate when these things happen, but often instead of investigating harassers or people who are harassed and bring that forward, are pushed aside or not believed. That seems to be exactly what happens in this story. The issue is that the gender roles are reversed of what it usually is in our society. That doesn't mean that men don't get harassed by more powerful women, and as more women become more powerful in the workplace, it can happen more and more. But what we often see historically, and even mostly today, is a more powerful man harassing a less powerful woman in this situation. And I just wish in a Bible where women are silenced so much, where we don't hear women's voices, where they aren't named. Potiphar's wife is not even named in this story. I wish this was a story about a woman who made better choices. I wish this was a story about, if the roles were reversed and the woman was being harassed, this could be a story about a woman who comes forward and is believed. But it's not that story. And so we deal with the story as we have it, acknowledging that in this particular context, it's got some uncomfortable points as we read it. The big picture story of what we've been hearing in this saga of Joseph is this up and down that Joseph goes through. He has dreams that he's going to be this powerful person. He gets sold into slavery by his brothers, and he's in the bottom of a pit. He ends up as a slave in Egypt in the household of an Egyptian official named Potiphar. He rises up in the ranks because he's got leadership abilities and administrative abilities, and Potiphar sees that and elevates him. He's a house slave, and he elevates him to a powerful house slave, still a slave, but in a very exalted position in the house. He gets harassed, he runs, he ends up in prison. We're going to find out that then he rises up in prison, as it says in the story, and because of his administrative skill. So it's a story of Joseph up and down, and the story will continue in prison, where he gets betrayed by a fellow prisoner. And then he ends up in Pharaoh's court somehow, and he rises up to the head of Egypt. So this is a story of Joseph making a lot of decisions in very hard circumstances. And the teaching that raises for me, as I read this story with all of its issues in modern times, is the doctrine, or the teaching, it's a teaching of 100% responsibility. And I've heard this several times in the past few weeks, which is why I'm bringing it to you today. When things come up multiple times for me, I might think, well, maybe God's telling me to bring this into the pulpit. I heard it for the first time from a Jewish rabbi who was commenting on this text, this idea of being 100% responsible. Then I heard it randomly on a podcast by Tara Brach, the Buddhist teacher. She started talking about 100% responsibility, so I Googled it. And there was a Mormon guy teaching about 100% responsibility. And so when there's a teaching that crosses religious traditions like that, I think it's a good thing. It's like, wow, there's some value in this. But let's first talk about very clearly what it means. To be 100% responsible, according to this teaching, means that we are each 100% responsible for the choices we make. We are each responsible for the choices we make. So let's talk about what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that everything is your fault. That if you're experiencing a hard time, if you've been treated unfairly, if you're in a difficult situation at work or in your family, or people are harming you, it's not your fault. The bad things that happen in life are not our fault. That's not what this is about. It is about being able to step back from a situation enough to honestly evaluate if we are contributing to the situation in some way. For Joseph, for instance, it wasn't his fault that he was enslaved by his brothers. He was sold into slavery by his brothers. That's not his fault. His brothers should be held accountable for the way they abused him in that way. Joseph was also really obnoxious and really annoying. He was a really annoying person to have as your brother. He was the youngest of 12, and he kept having these dreams where he would rule over his brothers, his older brothers, and he would then run out into the field to tell them about his dream. Hey guys, I just dreamed that I'm going to rule over you. You guys are going to bow down to me. That's really annoying. And maybe as he's being carted down to Egypt as a slave, he wants to do some self-reflection and say, they were wrong. They should not have sold me into slavery. That was bad. Is there anything I could have done differently? Could I have been a little more discerning, a little more diplomatic in how much I shared about my dream? So being 100% responsible is not about everything's our fault, but it is about, hey, let's look at a situation and say, is there anything I could have done differently? Is there any way I can take some responsibility and in the future create a better situation for myself? Being 100% responsible does not mean having no boundaries. It does not mean that we take responsibility for everything. We're responsible for everything that everybody does. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's saying, I can't be responsible for the decisions of other people. And sometimes we are tempted to do that. Doesn't mean we can't be caring, supportive, kind, helpful to other people when they're making their decisions. But in the end, each person has to make decisions for themselves, and we have to make decisions for ourselves. And so being 100% responsible is about creating good boundaries. It's about saying, I love you, I support you, and I can't make this decision for you. We do suffer the consequences when people make poor decisions. Sometimes when people are more powerful than us in particular, and they're making bad decisions, we suffer the consequences, and still, in that unfair situation, we say, what can I do? The situation is not right, it's not just, and I need to figure out what's the best move for me in this situation. It may be getting out of that relationship. It may be saying, this is unfair, and I need to figure out a way to remove myself because it's not going to get better. This person is not treating me well. This person is being unjust. And the best thing I can do is to plot my escape from this situation. Being 100% responsible is not a tool for judging others. It's not saying that person needs to be more responsible for themselves. They are making bad choices. They need to be 100% responsible. And I'm going to tell them they need to be 100% responsible because they're making such bad choices. This teaching about 100% responsibility is always a light we shine only on ourselves. It's like, how can I take power and control in this situation? Not how can I judge others for the mistakes they make, but how can I learn from the mistakes that I'm making? Ultimately, this is a teaching that even though we can be victimized in some situations, we are never victims. We will never claim that role as victims. We will say, this is unfair, this is unjust, this person shouldn't have done that, this person shouldn't be coming at me this way. And I have to make a choice. And it's got to be, sometimes it's two bad choices, like it was for Joseph. You know, do I give in to this Potiphar's wife, or do I run away and end up in jail? There's not always good choices, and we are responsible for making the best of bad situations. It should be an empowering idea. There could be a question that comes up about where is God in all this? This doesn't sound like a very religious idea. This sounds like a self-help idea. Nobody's talked about God or Jesus at all. I think God comes in two places. One is that God is with us in every decision. God's not going to make the decisions for us, but God is there with us. And we're told that in Joseph's story, that God was with Joseph, and God blessed Joseph, and God was with Joseph in every downturn, in every dark place, in the prison, in the enslaver's cart. God was with Joseph as Joseph thought to make the best choices he could make in that situation. So God is with us in every decision. And secondly, and I think more importantly, it is our relationship to God. It is our understanding that we are children of God, that we are creations of the creator of the universe, that we have been given by God beautiful minds, beautiful hearts, beautiful souls, and we are good people because God doesn't make no junk. We are good people. And it's that relationship with a loving God that can help us break cycles of shame that cause us to keep making bad decisions. There are times for many people when they make a poor decision and then they say, I'm therefore a bad person. And that leads them to then make more bad decisions because they believe they're a bad person. Our relationship with God and our understanding that we are loved by God and valued by God and cherished by God is what gives us the power to break those cycles. To say, I've made a bad choice, but I'm not a bad person. And I have the power and the agency to make a better choice next. Some other ways that our faith comes into this teaching about 100% responsibility is the hymn that we're going to sing right after the sermon. Jesus walked this lonesome valley. He had to walk it by himself. Nobody else could walk it for him. He had to walk it by himself. We must walk this lonesome valley. We have to walk it by ourselves. Nobody else could walk it for us. We have to walk it by ourselves. For a long time, I heard that hymn and I was like, that doesn't sound very Christian. That doesn't sound very nice. But I think it's a hymn that comes out of this teaching of 100% responsibility. It's saying that there can be people, we can surround ourselves with love. We can surround ourselves with support. We can draw from God's presence. And like Jesus, ultimately, we have to make a choice in life. And we have to make one choice after another. And the only person that's responsible for that choice is us. And then the other religious teaching that you've probably heard, because it's an old-time religious teaching, although it's still good today, is that we will one day have to stand before God and be held to account for our decisions and our choices. I know that's old school religion, but it's also 100% responsibility. It's saying the same thing. It's saying that when we stand before God and we look at our life and the choices we make, God's not going to say, oh yeah, your job was really hard and your boss was really mean, and so it wasn't your fault that you were mean to your spouse when you got home. And your kids are real brats, and it's not your fault that you yelled at them all the time. God's going to say, I'm going to deal with your boss later, and I'm going to deal with your kids later. You're standing before God, and God's going to say, why did you make that choice? You had the power to make a different choice. You always had that power. Ultimately, this is an empowering teaching. I want to wrap things up with a quote by Viktor Frankl, the famous psychiatrist, survivor of Auschwitz, and author of Man's Search for Meaning, that classic text. And he writes, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power and our freedom. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power and our freedom. Claiming 100% responsibility for our choices means that we pay attention to that space. And that if someone comes at us or some hard situation comes into our life that we have to face, we do not have to respond instinctively or reflexively or with our reptilian brain or whatever, that we are children of God who can take a breath and reflect on the situation we've been given, reflect on what's in front of us. And it may be we don't have a lot of time. It may be that we, excuse me. It may be that we have to step back and make the space bigger. And we have to take some time. Try water. See, I'm taking space. That we can take a breath in any situation. That we can reflect on how we might respond to this difficult situation that seems to have no good alternatives. That we can step back even to make that space larger. That hopefully in some situations we can get out of the situation before we respond to really pray and think about what we're going to do. But ultimately it is in that space that is our power and our freedom. Our power to make a choice as a person with a beautiful mind given to us by God, a beautiful heart, a beautiful soul, to make that space as a good person trying to make a hard decision, to make that space, to in that space make a choice that might not be a good choice, because sometimes there are no good choices, but it's a better choice than the other one. And it may be the best we can do. And if we are standing before God, I think that's what God's going to ask. Not did you were you perfect? Not did you always do perfectly and do the right thing, but in situations that were hard, did you make the best choice you could? Because in every situation like that, God is always there beside us, walking with us, even though we have to make the choice by ourselves.